Welcome to the Shoulda Bet More podcast presented by Go Boys. Coming up on the show today, Jeff Parles from Sports by the Book will drop by. We will discuss conference tournaments, March Madness, maybe get into some baseball, some NFL draft with Jeff. So looking forward to that. And it's still sort of that in-between period. We're a week away from March Madness. Still sort of that in-between period where you could talk a little baseball. You could talk certainly college basketball. There's starting to be some NFL content with these quarterbacks either signing or changing teams. By the time you listen to this, Cousins may have a new team. You might have stayed put. Sounds like Sunday night is when the decision was coming for Cousins. Thought about delaying this till he made his decision, but you know what? He's been in the league 12 years and he's only won one playoff game, so I'm not staying up later than I need to or keeping other people up later than I need to. We got to get this podcast out. And if you've only won one playoff game in a dozen years, you're not worth the time adjustment. But we'll start with college basketball. And in a lot of ways, it felt like on Sunday the NCAA tournament started because that felt like a NCAA tournament game. That felt like March Madness between Indiana State and Drake. Drake was not going to get in the tournament if they didn't win the conference. They won it. They're in. Indiana State's now interesting because they have 28 wins, but they don't have a lot of marquee wins. They don't have anything non-conference. They played Rice and won. They played Pepperdine and won. They went to Alabama. They weren't competitive, lost by 22. So Lenardi had them as an 11 seed going into the day. That's right, sort of on the borderline of, hey, they're in, but you wouldn't feel good. You figure the loss knocks them down a little. Maybe the fact that they came back and were competitive because they were down 18 and they lost the game by 25. You know, it'd be easy for the committee to say, you know what, you lost by 25 in your title game. You don't have any great wins. I don't care what your record is. You're not getting in. I hope they get in. I don't need to see the likes of Virginia and Villanova, Providence, these other teams that are on the bubble that aren't any good. Put in Indiana State in. They won most of their games. They won 28 games. That's a hell of a season. That game could have gone either way on Sunday. They rallied from down 18 and they led by one, and then it was tied, and they led by two again after a 3-point foul. They couldn't get the lead and the ball. Every time they got a 1 point, 2 point lead, Drake would hit a bucket. Then eventually it was tied again where Indiana State had the ball. They got an offensive foul. Drake hit a three. Indiana State couldn't match. And then Drake kind of put the game away from there. So that was a hell of a game. NCAA tournament kind of atmosphere, the runs, the momentum. That felt like March. That felt like a tournament game. And Indiana State will be a team to watch here in terms of one of the last four. We talked a few weeks ago about St. John's having a good map to get in that they want to put New York in, have that market, have Patino. They've played well, although they didn't play great against Georgetown, but they've won all their games since, starting with that Creighton game a couple of weeks ago. So they're a team that'll be interesting. Other things from college basketball with these conference tournament starts, it's hard to keep up. I want to do these podcasts and not have it be completely irrelevant 2 days later with talking about games for Monday. Well, when the games on Monday happen, then you're not going to listen to this on Tuesday. So just big picture stuff. One team that jumps out to me that's interesting is USC, because USC has Collier, who went into the season. A lot of people thought he's going to be the number one pick in the draft. Didn't have a good season, hurt his hand. USC had a bad year. They have played incredibly well the last 2 or 3 weeks. He's played well. They've played well. He's had some monster games. They buried Arizona on Saturday. Buried them, but they won, and they won convincingly. So USC 40-1 at DraftKings to win the Pac-12. Maybe you're better playing them game by game, but they will be a popular pick. And sitting here 40-1 now, my guess is this number moves a little bit because they will be very trendy. Again, they got a tough bracket. They got to play a couple of these good teams. They got to win a bunch of games, but they are a very dangerous team. They are a very dangerous seed. They could absolutely go on a run and steal somebody's bid. And that's what you're looking for this week of the tournament, other than the one bid leagues where those games are always dramatic, always fun. Those are all game sevens pretty much. The winner gets to go dancing. The loser, it's NIT at best. That's just they're so exciting. They're so dramatic. What you're looking for is the Big East, the Pac-12, these major conferences, Big 10, Big 12. By the time you get to the semifinals, that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, all those teams are basically going to make the tournament regardless of what happens in the conference tournament. So what you're looking for are these teams that aren't in, that have no chance of getting in, that go on a run like Oregon State a few years ago and steal a bid. So maybe we'll get that with USC. That's interesting. They're a team to watch. They got some pro talent, including Collier, a couple other guys that might play in the league, might get drafted. So keep an eye on USC. They are 40-1, like I said. Worth a sprinkle. Shop around, maybe get a 50-1 somewhere. Maybe just playing game by game. But that's a team that could certainly win a few games and make it interesting. Maybe even get to a Pac-12 title game. And then, hey, if you're sitting there with a 40-1, you can earn off that and figure out what you want to do. When you're looking at these conference tournaments, I wouldn't lay price like Arizona's minus 160, UConn's minus money. I wouldn't lay minus money because you never know the motivation of these teams that are big time title contenders in the conference tournament. There's plenty of years where UConn won the title and they won their Big East tournament and they won both. There are other years where they won the conference They didn't win the conference tournament. They did win the title. So there's not a lot of correlation between, all right, if you win the title, that means you did well in the conference tournament. There's a lot of, it's really like last year, UConn, they won the title. They were dominant the entire March Madness. They were the entire NCAA tournament, but they lost in the semifinals to Marquette. And again, there are other years when they win the Big East and then they win the whole thing. So sometimes these teams go out early in the conference tournament and win it all. Sometimes they win the conference tournament and they go out early in March Madness. Sometimes they win both. I haven't found that there's a lot of correlation between conference tournament and NCAA tournament. So I don't know, not laying a minus price for any of these big favorites. Not saying they won't win. They probably will. They're favored. If there was one that caught my eye, Creighton's around 4-1. That one's interesting. They play hard. They play well against UConn. No Kolek maybe for Marquette. So if you can get to a final at 4-1, you're happy to have that ticket. St. John's is going to be an interesting team because that tournament is in their building. So keep an eye on them. So great time of the year. Games on all the time. Just it's as good as it gets. Starting with a few days ago, that Thursday where you get day games, and then the games start to get better with these bigger conferences. Just night and day action leading into Selection Sunday. You get a couple of days off. You get one day off, and then Tuesday and Wednesday, those playing games, and it leads into Thursday at noon, which I still consider the start of the tournament, Thursday at noon. I know they call it the first four, and those count as NCAA tournament games. To me, the tournament is Thursday, 12:10 Eastern. Boom. You get one game that tips off then, and another 20 minutes, half hour later, you get another game, and 3 or 4 more that afternoon, and then into the night slate. It's just the best. So to me, the tournament still starts at noon Eastern on Thursday. Like I said, some NFL stuff. Cousins might have a team by the time you're listening to this. My guess it would be Atlanta. If it could, is it possibly goes back to Minnesota? I guess it is. Baker Mayfield signs a 3-year, $100 million deal, which is an eye-popping amount of money. I don't know that I'd give it to him, but again, I don't know what the other options are with football. I guess the way this contract is worded, they could, if it didn't work out, the way this contract is worded, they could get out of it after a year for like 40 million. And it's not that bad. It's almost like a franchise tag plus a little more. And it's easy for me to say, hey, this is another Daniel Jones. You overpaid for one good year. Why do you want to do this? And I think there's some truth to that. I wouldn't be surprised a year from now, 2 years from now, if they're looking for a quarterback, drafting a quarterback. I wouldn't be shocked at all. How could you be? He was on the scrap heap not that long ago. But again, it's easy for me to say, don't get this guy, like I said with Russell Wilson and the Steelers, but it's harder for me to say this is who you should get. There's not enough quarterbacks to go around. It's a game of musical chairs, and there are not enough quarterbacks to fill the chairs. Plus, Baker Mayfield gives you a chance to be competent. And when you're a GM, when you're a coach, like if you suck, you get fired. If you go 9-8 and you make the playoffs, very few front offices, coaches, very few people get fired for making the playoffs. So you say, you know what, we're not going to win a Super Bowl with Baker Mayfield. That's highly unlikely, but could he get us to the playoffs? Yes. If we make the playoffs, probably don't get fired. We probably don't have to move, things like that. There is a human element. Hey, I got a 3-year contract. I'm making a couple $1,000,000 a year. If I just make the playoffs, I get to maybe get a contract extension. I don't get fired. I don't have to go look for another job. So there is an element of, we talked about it with the Steelers. Why do they want to be 9-8? Well, Mike Tomlin's still there. Like very, very rarely do teams lose their job for being slightly over 500, even if you're not great. The fact that, hey, we made the playoffs, even if you have no chance of winning the whole thing, there is some value to these guys. I know fans are like, hey, 9-8, and I lost by 100 points in the first round. What does that do for me? Well, it matters to these GMs, these coaches that get to keep their job. And I do think there's an element of that with Baker where, man, it's a lot of money for Baker Mayfield. I don't know. It felt a little fluky. It felt like, hey, they won a bad division almost by default, but they did win a playoff game. Played well in that Philly game. Almost beat Detroit. We're tied in the fourth quarter. So, hey, they're not that far away from being in the NFC title game. I'm not shocked they brought him back, but again, a lot of money. I don't know that that's going to be a great deal. I don't know that's going to age great for Tampa. So keep an eye on the football as free agency heats up this week. Quickly on the NBA, I wasn't going to lead with an NBA game from 5 days ago, but this game happened a few hours after I recorded. Nuggets Celtics on Thursday. I think that game is very symbolic. And there are very few NBA games now that matter, that mean something. I think that game is very symbolic of where the league is, because I think we're going to get a rematch of that game on Thursday night in the finals. And I think we're going to get the same result. To me, if you ask me right now, hey, who's in the finals, who wins it? It's Denver versus Boston, and it's Denver over Boston. They just have the best player. Jokic is so absurdly good. And I know a lot of people still don't watch him every night because he's in Denver. It's not a major market. For whatever reason, he's not flashy. It's more passing. It's more fundamentals. He is so damn good. And he has enough around him where Murray's a good 2. He's not a great 2. He's not Pippen. He's not Kobe with Shaq, but he's a good two. All-star, borderline all-star. I don't think he's ever made an all-star team, but he's good enough to be an all-star. When you have somebody as good as Jokic and your number two is good enough to be an all-star, that's a very good duo. And again, they have just enough around him with Gordon. Is a good Swiss Army knife. I shouldn't say just enough, but they have enough. Gordon's a good Swiss Army knife. Size, can defend, can hit some shots here and there, can cut, can rebound, do a bunch of things. And Porter Jr. can get hot from three. You'd like one more player, like one more bench player. They lost Bruce Brown from last year. It's not a great team. It's not a team that's going to absolutely dominate and win all these series in 4 or 5 games like some of those Lakers teams in the early 2000s with Shaq and Kobe, like those Durant Warriors. But I do think they're going to win the title. I mentioned last week at plus 475, like, hey, you put that one in your pocket, almost 5-1. You put it in your pocket and you're going to be happy in May. It's down to 4-1. I think you're kind of running out of time with that, but the point still stands. I do think we're looking at Denver, Boston in the finals. And to me, they just have more. Like Jokic is the best player. Sometimes it comes down to as simple as that. Jokic is the best player. Tatum's a very good player. He's not a great player. So I do think we'll see that rematch in the finals. Denver versus Boston. Denver with a little bit of a statement win that Thursday night. How Denver was getting a point and a half at home didn't make a lot of sense to me. I know it's easy to say after the fact, but man, you're going to be Denver at home plus the points. That's one I wish I had touched on because that's just, you play that almost on principle. So I do think we're looking at a Denver Boston finals. Not that it's a foregone conclusion, but I don't know that I trust the competition from really either conference. Denver, you could say the West is better than it was last year. Yes, it is, but Oklahoma City is young and small. We went through this last week. Phoenix is always hurt, and that's shaping up to be a disaster with all they gave up for Durant and all they gave up for Beal. The Clippers, they're good, but I don't know if you trust them. Minnesota, I don't trust. Plus, Towns is hurt now. So, and then on the East, maybe Dame and Giannis can get it together, but the East has really not looked as strong here with the Knicks all beat up. Starting to get a little healthier, but still have some injuries. So Denver versus Boston in June is what I expect. We'll see. The playoffs will be here before you know it. Once the playoffs come, we'll do plenty of NBA. I love the NBA playoffs. It's just tough regular season, to get into it. Not that many games matter, especially this time of the year, kind of playing out the strings. So the seedings will matter. The matchups will matter. So we will do plenty of that once March Madness clears and get into the draft. It's a fun time of the year ahead with March Madness, with the draft, with the NBA playoffs, baseball, all good things around the corner. Things got to, you got to taste the spring on Sunday with the daylight savings because you do lose the hour of sleep, but then it's just lighter later. You're in a better mood. It's a good time of year. Hard to believe this time 4 years ago. It's almost, in a way, it seems like 30 years ago, and it seems like it was 10 minutes ago. This time 4 years ago, the world shut down and we had no sports. We had no sports for like what good 3-4 months. I think it was 4 months because it was half of March, and then it was April, May, June, pretty much all of July. So it's like good 4.5 months. At the end of July, like the last week or so of July, I think Yankees Nationals, the baseball season started, which is crazy to think about. But I think about it from now until July 24th, how long that is. And that's how long we went without sports in 2020. So always this time of year, it makes you think about just what a crazy time that was to have no tournament, to have no sports, all the just fear of like what was going to happen. Like what world were we entering? Just strange how that is 4 years ago now. But we'll talk a little more college basketball. We'll talk some baseball, NFL drafts. We'll go around the board, talk a little everything with Jeff Parles. That is next. This is the Shoulda Bet More podcast. All right, we are back. Shoulda Bet More podcast. You can hear his work at Sports by the Book. He is the great Jeff Parles, and he rejoins us once again. Jeffrey, what's going on, man?
It's it's a pretty good time of the year. Pretty good time of the year. March Madness is, as much as we love football and as fun as the 18 weeks of the NFL regular season and the playoffs are in all of college football, these 3 weeks, the 2 conference tournament weeks, and especially the first weekend of the big dance, I don't have more fun at any time of the year than I do than in these 3 weeks.
So I'm with you. I think a lot of people say October because you get the playoff baseball and you get like the college football on Saturday, the NFL on Sunday. But to me, it's almost too much where you can't really enjoy it. The good thing about March is there's so many games on, but it's only college basketball, like in terms of like the important stuff where you can really soak it and enjoy it and focus on it, where it's not, you feel a little spread out when it's, like the last day of the baseball season ends on a Sunday and you got football and pennant races. This is, you can soak it in when it's March.
Look, we're both East Coast guys through and through, too. Will, as big of a baseball town as New York is, you still think the Big East tournament. Like that,
Yes.
I was like, I wasn't growing up there, I wasn't alive in the 80s when everyone said it was the best of the best, but mid 2000s Big East tournaments are pretty darn good in their
Oh
own
yeah.
right. I mean, from Carmelo Anthony and company at Syracuse
The
to those
coaches too. I
really,
mean, Patino, Boeheim, Calhoun, so many great coaches.
yeah, I mean, Kemba Walker's run. I was at that
Yes.
title game against really the forgotten part of that UConn championship, Will, was winning that title game against Louisville.
Yes.
That really changed the course of the whole NCAA tournament because if it was a one possession game, UConn found a way in a game where Kemba Walker got in foul trouble as well. He didn't play a lot in that first half. If Louisville wins that game, Louisville gets Connecticut's 3 seed. Connecticut gets a 4, gets shipped out to Denver and has to play Kenneth Faried and Morehead State. I'm not saying UConn would have had the same fate as Louisville, but that whole tournament would have been completely different if Louisville had won that game. Instead, Louisville goes out, UConn steamrolls to 6 straight wins and a championship behind Kemba Walker's greatness.
Let's start with March Madness. I started the show with Indiana State Drake. It almost felt like the tournament started. That felt like a tournament game. Do you think the committee puts Indiana State in? Do you want them in?
Let's start with the second question. 100% yes, because the way that the bubble is breaking this year, and we say this every year, and this is why I'm anti-expansion anyway, even if they're like, oh, we're only going to 70. And Team 78, for the most part, you don't really want in there because you just get crappy, mediocre power conference teams. And you look at the bubble, Indiana State to me is better than Virginia. They're better than Providence. They're pretty equal to St. John's. I actually would bet St. John's in a game against Indiana State because I think they play similar enough styles and St. John's has better athletes. But they're better than Wake Forest. Indiana State is like all these bubble teams that we're looking at. Indiana State is just a better basketball team. And, it's a shame for them. If they had that win, because remember, James Madison, of course, began the season with the win at Michigan State. Indiana State went to East Lansing about 3 weeks later, was very competitive against Michigan State, but because Michigan State had a bunch of losses on their ledger, including that JMU one, they were more focused and they won the game in the end. But Indiana State showed their mettle in that game. They were toe to toe with Michigan State at Breslin. In this game today, I mean, Drake didn't miss a 3 in the first 23 minutes of the game. Well, like that's hard to overcome. They got an 18-point hole because Drake shot way over their heads. And look, I would have been pro Drake getting an at-large bid, even though I thought their path was significantly harder to an at-large path than Indiana State. But I would put them in. Do I think they'll get in? I have no idea. I think it's going to depend on what happens this week. Providence, who again is like the quintessential bubble team in this era with really a limited amount of quality wins, but all those Q1 games because of the nature of their conference. Providence goes out in the round of 8 in the Big East, which is what I think will happen to them. Then Indiana State should be in over them. They should be in over Wake if they don't win multiple games in DC. I don't know, man. I think as of right now, they really need to hope that there's no bid steals. The A10 seems like a league. If Dayton doesn't win it, that's a bid steal. The Pac-12, if it's not Arizona or Wazoo, is a bid steal. I think Colorado's in as it is, but some would argue they won't be. But I would put the Sycamores in. They're clearly one of the best at-large teams in the country. They deserve to be in.
Yeah, it's interesting because let me ask this: do you think they'll put Michigan State in? It's Michigan State absolutely.
So today complicates that, doesn't it? With losing at Indiana, where it's pretty funny. The walls are caving in, the sky is falling in Bloomington, and they still finish in the top half of the Big Ten,
Right.
even with this disastrous season. Obviously, Indiana's not getting there unless if they run the table in Minneapolis. I think Michigan State's just going to get it on the name recognition, personally.
I agree.
And look, in the end, like that win over Baylor and Detroit, where they beat Baylor by a zillion, it might be in the end why Michigan State forget being sent to Dayton. It's probably why they're just going to be in the bracket as long as they don't blow their first game in Minneapolis this week.
Plus, it's a brand. Plus, those first 4 they like to get ratings. So if you throw Izzo, hey, we'll give you a break. We'll put you in the tournament, but we're going to help out our ratings. We'll put you in the first 4 in Dayton. I wouldn't put that past them. Do you think?
Wouldn't shock me.
Where are you at with St. John's? They're going to be in the main draw, or they're going to It's going to depend on the Big East tournament. They could be in the first four because, boy, they would love, speaking of draw, I mean, they would love a Patino-Izzo first four matchup. I know they would love that.
Boy, I'd love to bet St. John's in that
Me
potential
too.
game if that happened. So Johnny's and Seton Hall play each other in the 4-5 at MSG. I think Seton Hall's safe. I know a lot of bracketologists have them pretty close. I think they deserve to be in. When you have a win like they do, where they really, I know it was earlier in the year, but they pummeled UConn in Newark. Like, that game wasn't competitive.
Hell of a win.
I know Cleveland got hurt, but I'm sorry. You beat, to me, the best team in the country handily in your building, and your resume looks like Seton Hall's. You should be in. I don't think they need the game against St. John's. St. John's does need this game. If they beat Seton Hall, they're in. And as long as, and you know what, even if they like beat Seton Hall by 1 and then got beat down by UConn, I still think they're fine. If they somehow get to the Big East final, which would then in that case include wins over Seton Hall and UConn, forget going to Dayton. They're in the actual bracket. If they beat Seton Hall, lose to UConn, I think they're going to Dayton. But they should be in. And look, if they end up missing, it's their own fault. I mean, they're running the middle of the season. Like, they were bad for a 3-week stretch. They've rectified it. Honestly, they should have a season sweep over Creighton, because the game they lost in Omaha, I thought they got jobbed by the refs at the end of the game. It was a BS foul that they called on St. John's, and then St. John's got fouled at the end, and they swallowed the whistles. But the Johnnies, to me, again, I think they are clearly they are better. They're better than a lot of these bubble teams. They're better than Providence. They're better than Wake Forest. They're better than Virginia. I think they're dead ass even with Indiana State. I think they're better than Michigan State, but I know the resumes don't necessarily say that. But the Red Storm should be in when it's all said and done. And I think they'll get sent to Dayton, unless if they somehow get to the Big East final, then they're going to be safely in the dance and going to wherever they may go. Will.
So we're recording this Sunday night. By the time people listen to this, maybe it's Monday morning, maybe Monday night. So we'll try not to date it too much, but any of these conferences interest you from a betting perspective? Smaller, bigger, take it whatever direction you want to go.
So I will say this. I don't know. We don't know the bracket at the time, Will. But in the Big Ten, Ohio State's price, I know your guy Sam Panayotovich has brought them up with you and the Bear and Jeff Schwartz. But Ohio State's price will be an interesting one. If it gets high enough, I would consider taking a dart on them in the Big Ten. They're NCAA tournament talent, but because they didn't love playing for Holtman, they were this big disappointment. They smashed Rutgers on Sunday. That would probably be the big dart I would look at if we're looking at conferences. The A10, there are teams that I'm curious to see what their prices are. George Mason's the 8. They would play Richmond, who is the 1, and they smoked Richmond on Saturday. That would be one I'd be looking at. VCU, I think, matches up very well at the top of that conference, and they should have beat Dayton on Friday night in Dayton's place. There are darts to be had in the A10. I don't think Dayton's winning that tournament in Brooklyn. So if you want to take a dart there, no problem with that. And then the tournament I'm most looking forward to is the SEC. Tennessee, Kentucky, and Auburn, I all think are capable of making the Final Four, and I think are all capable of winning the national title with the right draw. And Tennessee might have to go Auburn, Kentucky, semifinal, final. That would be a heck of a gauntlet for Tennessee to run if they want to steal that 1 seed away from Arizona, where Arizona's just begging to have it taken away from them. They lose to USC on Saturday night. But that's the tournament I'm most looking forward to, is the SEC, just because those 3 teams, I just think, for the top of any league in the country, the SEC's top is the best of anyone. They're not the best league, but the top of that league is the best of any top of anyone in the country.
And Kentucky's 4-1 to win the SEC tournament. I should have mentioned Kentucky off the top. A great win in Tennessee. Had a nice win in Auburn a few weeks ago. So they've turned a corner. Are you buying USC as a sleeper here? 40-1. I know the bracket's not great for them, but man, they got an elite talent in Collier. They seem to have just turned a new leaf since the Collier injury has sort of healed. They played better. Are you buying them?
If they had not just lost, or just beat Arizona, I should say, Will. If they had just not beaten Arizona, I would say, okay, take the shot. I just don't love it that Arizona is going to play the back-to-back games for the Cats. USC should handle their business in round one. They'll be a favorite in that game, even though they're the lower seed. But I don't know. The Pac-12, that league stinks. I guess the dart would be Colorado, but their number's not going to be good enough if you really want to take a dart in that league. And I don't think they beat Arizona heads up. So I don't know. I mean, it does seem on the surface like a league you could do it. I just don't love that USC has to play Arizona, where Arizona's seeing them back-to-back games. And, of course, USC just beat them on Saturday. And I love Collier, man. What a player he is when he's healthy. We saw it again on Saturday.
And you mentioned Colorado only 5-1. I'd probably need a little more than that.
Not good enough.
Not good enough. What number, you mentioned Ohio State. What number would you need on Ohio State?
Well, that bracket, as we record this, is not finalized because the wonders of Penn State and Maryland are playing each other as we speak, Will. So that bracket will come out later in the night. So, look, there's two things. I want Ohio State. I want Ohio State on the bottom of the bracket. I really want them to find a way. I would love to have seen them get the 11 seed, which is not really in play anymore. I have to see how to type. Well, actually, if Penn State wins, I think Penn State would get that 11 with 10 seed, which would push Ohio State down to the 11, which then makes their run a lot easier where it's a 6 seed, whether it's Iowa or Wisconsin, that I just don't think is that good. And then playing Nebraska as the 3. We know the 1 through 4. Nebraska got the 3. I think they're very weak away from Lincoln. I mean, you got to probably still be pushing probably 30-1, 40-1 on Ohio State still will. But I don't know if you're going to get that price if you get the 11. If they get lined up with Illinois, then the price is different. Then you're going to get that bigger bomber price. Same if they somehow end up in that 8-9 matchup, which I don't think is possible at this point.
Who's the second best team in the country? I think we all agree UConn's the best. Who's the second best?
Houston's the second best team in the country. Purdue, I think Purdue is forget the failings in the tournament in recent years. Well, I don't really care about that. The problem is, and it goes back to that Ohio State game, actually. I'm concerned about Purdue when a game grinds.
Yeah.
Because usually you see teams that are slow teams that end up having to run and their brain explodes. It's the opposite for Purdue. If they have to grind it out, I think they're going to lose. Now, the interesting thing is I think they're going to get lined up with Kentucky, and that might be a game that's played in the 200s. And I think Kentucky will beat them personally. But it's Houston as the second best team. Look, their depth is a question, but they're better on offense than they've been in this run with Kelvin Sampson. And that was the problem last year. Their offense just died in that game against Miami. The year before that, Villanova beat them in that absurdly slow game. That was awful. And then they just didn't have enough offense against Baylor in the Final Four in the 2021 tournament. But this team is better on offense. They're better with their guard play. So, look, I don't know if Houston gets to the Final Four. There are some matchups that I could see for them that scare me a little bit with them before a potential Final Four. But Houston is behind UConn. It's UConn, Houston, Purdue, Tennessee is my 1 through 4 right now. Even though they're not going to be a top 2 seed, Kentucky is 5th and North Carolina is 6th for me. Those are the 6 teams that I give a really good shot and the best shot of anyone to win the national championship this year.
Do a couple different things before we get you out of here. NFL draft. Do you have any takes on what will happen, what should happen, what might happen? Any interest? My whole thing is like I still think it's gonna be Caleb 1, whatever quarterback 2, and then New England. If they're lukewarm on a quarterback at 3, that's where it could get interesting. Do they take a quarterback no matter who's left, or do they pivot? Do you have any thoughts on where the draft is going?
So Caleb clearly goes 1. I know there's a lot of detractors of him out there. It's nonsense. He's clearly the best quarterback in this draft. I think Jaden Daniels' ceiling is higher than Drake May's. I think May's floor is a little higher. So whatever Washington does at 2, I can't really get on them. For New England, it's a fascinating perspective here because if Washington takes the quarterback that they are higher on, then if you're New England, well, being out here in Vegas, the Raiders are so desperate for a quarterback. And it's not quiet that they love Jaden Daniels because of the connection with Antonio Pierce. Of course, Pierce was with them when Daniels was at Arizona State when Herm and company were there. Pierce loves Daniels. And it would not shock me if the Raiders give up a King's ransom to move up to 3 if Daniels is there. After that, I don't get the noise on why Joe Alt is not the first tackle taken at this point. There's a lot more noise than there should be that he won't be. I think the Chargers would be nuts to let him get past them at their pick that high in the draft. The Giants at 6 are fascinating, man. What do you do? The reports are swirling with Daniel Jones. I do not expect Saquon to be back. So I expect this to be kind of a rebuild. If they like J.J. McCarthy enough, even though I think it's crazy that he's being discussed as a top 10 pick, I guess if you're the Giants, if you like him, you got to take him at 6, unless if you move up to 3 and take one of those big 3 quarterbacks. That's really where things can get a lot of fun with that Giants pick at 6. After that, I'm not really sure. I don't know what the Jets are going to – well, I think I know what the Jets are going to do. They're probably going to get it wrong. But I would be surprised if the Jets don't take an offensive lineman at 10 unless if Brock Bowers happens to be there. If he does, that's hard to pass up. I know people are getting on him because of his build. I think it's a load of crap. I think the kid is going to be amazing. I think he's going to be right away a top 3 tight end in the NFL, and whoever ends up with him ends up with a star. But it's going to be a fascinating draft because once it gets to that Giants pick, that's really what's going to set the course for the whole rest of the first round. And I really do think the Giants are going to take quarterback at 6. And that probably means it's J.J. McCarthy. And I don't know if Giant fans are going to be happy with that.
So you're a Jets fan, for people that don't know. You want Bowers over, like that's your dream scenario is Bowers?
I want Alt.
Okay.
After that, I don't expect Alt to get there. After that, all those guys, look, Fashanu is reminds me of Becton. And that scares me. Fuga is a prototypical right tackle. If they sign Tyron Smith and want to take Fuga at 10, no problem with that. The other guys all scream projects to me. So if Alt's there at 10, it's an automatic. I would want to break into the draft room and run the draft card up to Goodell myself if Alt gets to them at 10. But other than that, there are concerns I have with the other tackles. If Bowers is there, it's very hard to pass him up. But if they take Fuga, they take a Fashanu. I can't really get on him. I can't get on him because they're in such desperate need of offensive line help.
How about baseball? You're a Mets fan. Last time we had you on, I think it was a week or so before
right
the Super
before
Bowl.
Senga got hurt, man.
Yeah, you were confident. Is that confidence taking a hit?
Yeah, it has. I just don't think they have enough pitching. I think their lineup is going to be good.
Me too.
The one thing that I will say with them, Will, is if they can get Senga back by June 1st, we've seen this in the past.
Is that how bad it is? Where June 1st is the goal, is the target date?
Well, I'm just throwing a date out there. No one seems to know what the actual timeline is on him yet,
which is never good.
Well, I don't know. I don't think that's the Mets playing it close to the vest. I think it's the Mets just not knowing what the real timeline is on that at this point. But look, I mean, 2 years ago, they didn't have DeGrom until July, and they were still fine. Obviously, we know what happened at the end, but 101 games still should have been enough to win that division. Braves had to play 800 ball basically for 2.5 months to catch him. If you can hang in there, if you're the Mets, until Senga gets back, and look, they're not winning the division. Atlanta's much better than them. Probably not even finishing second because we've talked about this. To me, the two best non-Dodger teams in the NL are in the NL East. The Dodgers are going to win 106 plus games. The Braves are going to be awesome, and the Phillies are really good. And the Mets just have to hang in that wild card race. Because the one good thing about the National League, after those top 3 teams, someone has to win the Central. I think it's going to be the Cubs, but I have no confidence in that. There has to be 2 other playoff teams. And you look at the rest of the league, it's like, all right, Colorado's awful. All those teams in the Central, I don't think anyone, other than the Cubs, I don't think anyone else is winning more than 83. That's probably not going to be good enough to get either the 5 or the 6. So then you look to the NL East and the NL West teams. I have no idea what the Padres are going to be. I have no clue. If you told me they were going to be 75 and 87, I wouldn't be shocked. And if you told me they were going to win 87 games and be the 5 seed, I wouldn't be stunned. They have huge variance. The Giants, very nice offseason. Their starting pitching after Logan Webb is terrible, though, which scares me for them. And then the Marlins were a fluke last year. I think they're going backwards. And the Nationals aren't ready yet. So you could be the 6th seed if you're a mediocre 85 and 77 seed. And if you're the Mets with the win total around 80, that should be your expectation. Find a way in, sneak in, show at least a pulse, get to the playoffs. If you lose early, so be it. But we've seen since this expansion to 6 playoff teams in each league, I mean, the National League champion the 2 years in this format have been nonsense teams. The Phillies team 2 years ago was really not that good. And the Diamondbacks were legitimately terrible, even though they got hot at the right time. So, yeah, I didn't mention Arizona. I think Arizona's taking a humongous step back. Well, I think they're missing the playoffs and going sub 80. So it's there for the taking. It's there for the taking to make the playoffs as the 6th seed if you're the Mets. Do I think they do it? Probably not. But it's definitely there for the taking with the way of the mediocrity of that league.
What do you think Snell signs? When do you think he signs?
When do I think he signs? I think he signs next week. I think he signs with the New York Yankees. I think that's where he ends up. If you ask me where Jordan Montgomery's going, I have no idea. I have no clue. But I think Snell ends up in pinstripes. And, I mean, if you're the Yankees, you're seeing this with Soto in spring trading. Like, don't you have to go all in here while you know you have him? Like, I still think Soto does end up signing a long-term deal with the Yankees next offseason. But you got to go for this if you're the Yankees. And the one weakness on this team is their starting pitching depth. You and I talked about this when I was on with you last.
Yeah.
You get Snell in there. I know he's wildly inconsistent, and you could get a bad Snell year where he walks the ballpark and he can't get out of the 5th inning more times than not. But with seeing how bad Rodon looks right now, you need to get another arm in there. And Snell, just give him a 3-year contract with an opt-out after every single year. Like, if you're the Yankees, that overpay him for 1 year and then hope he has a good year and let him walk next year when you're trying to give Soto the $550, $600 million contract. I think it makes a ton of sense.
Totally agree. I just don't know that that's their MO anymore. But like, it's been a while. It's been 15 years now since they've not just won a World Series, but made a World Series. And it's, this is not a situation where you got Soto for 1 year. It's not a situation where you win 94 games and you lose in the ALCS. And it's all right. We had a great year. Like, no. You got first. You do have to get to the playoffs, but you got to do something when you get there. Like, I guess if you lost in 6 or 7 games to the Braves or the Dodgers in the World Series, you say, you know what, you live with it. But you got to at least get back to the World Series one of these years. You just, I don't know. It's there is a sense of urgency, I think, with them where losing in the playoffs is not good enough.
100%. And look, Will, I would say this: if they get to the World Series and they lose to one of those big 3 in the NL, the Dodgers, the Braves, or the Phillies, all right, so be it. So be it. You lost to a team that's really good. And if it's the Dodgers or the Braves, they're still better than the Yankees. The Phillies, I think, are pretty much on par with the Yankees at this point. So, okay, fine. But you cannot, in this year, if you're the Yankees, and I don't care that Baltimore looks poised to be every bit as good as them in the regular season. I don't care that Houston is Houston, and I don't care that Texas is the defending world champions. You cannot lose in the American League playoffs this year if you're the Yankees. You have to get to the World Series. Anything short of that is a failure this year, especially if Soto's not coming back. If Soto's coming back and you get him back and you're willing to pay him, all right, that's one thing. But it's sure as hell going to feel like a big-time failure if they lose in 6 games to Houston again in the ALCS.
Totally agree. Last one before we get out of here. NBA. Are we looking at a Nuggets Celtics rematch from the other night?
I would be shocked if the Nuggets don't get back. Even though the West is just so strong, top to bottom. It's so weird. And Will, this changes on a dime in this league because 2 years ago, this was the team that couldn't win a big playoff series. Last year, they were arguably the most disrespected 1 seed ever going into the playoffs, and they steamrolled to a title. Now it's, we trust them because they won a title, and it's correct because they have the best player in the league right now. And as good as Oklahoma City's been, I don't think they're built to beat them in the 7-game series. I think Minnesota's screwed without Cat. I really do. I think the extra dimensions that he's given them really hurts them with him being out, and I don't know if even he'll be ready for the playoffs. I mean, the other teams in the mix, I don't trust Phoenix. I don't trust New Orleans. The Clippers are the team that everyone's talking about. Win a big playoff series before I trust you. And I think Denver matches up pretty well with them anyway, even though they've had problems with them in the regular season. On the East side, it's only 2 teams. There's only 2 teams that can make it out of the Eastern Conference. It's Boston and it's Milwaukee. And one of them is coached by Doc Rivers. So to answer your question in the long round, yes, we're getting the rematch of what we saw earlier in the week. And if you're giving me Denver as an underdog, there's no way I can possibly pass on that. That has to be a bet, even with Boston having home court, if Denver is an underdog in that series. Denver's beat them twice in the regular season. And until Jason Tatum, and look, I don't know why the NBA national media loves Jason Tatum as much as they do. He is a top 15 player in this league. He is awesome. He is an all-star. But the national media for years has tried to push him into the level of being one of the 5 best players in this league. He's not. And there's nothing wrong with that. But until he wins a title and doesn't disappear in big moments, like he did again against Denver on Thursday, there is no reason to expect him and that team to win an NBA Finals against a team that is better than them. So Denver, at this moment, I have Denver repeating. And there's not much that can happen unless they get beat by the Clippers that makes me think differently than that at this point.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And it'd be interesting because you say what they're going to be an underdog. I was like, how can they be an underdog? Well, look, they were an underdog in their own building the other night. Boston's going to have home court. You would look at Denver maybe differently by the time they got to a finals, but hey, they won a championship. Now they're in another finals. I feel like there will be a lot of sentiment for betting Denver because there's a narrative. I don't want to say narrative because narrative implies not true. There's a center on Boston that they can't close, that they can't win big games. That would be a fascinating series line if it's Denver Boston.
I personally would make Denver a small favorite. Actually, no, I wouldn't because Boston at home court. I would make Boston the smallest of favorites. I'd make them like minus 115, minus 105. Well, if that was the series. But I would expect Boston to be $1.45, $1.50, maybe even north of that if they have a dominant playoff run. And I don't think that's the right price.
Yep. Anything at plus money, give me Denver. I know they won't have the 7th game at home, but you figure they steal one in Boston and then then they could just home serve. That would be a good final. That would be a really good final. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if Denver win game 2 in Boston, go up 3-1, make Boston win game 5, and then beat them in home in game 6. I mean, that's a very plausible path to winning the title there.
And like you mentioned, should be good playoffs. The Suns give you enough with Durant and whatever. I mean, that trade's shaping up to be an absolute disaster between what they gave up for Durant and Beal, but that's still a good team. The Thunder, I mean, the Pelicans are a little underrated. I mean, it's a good postseason where a lot of years the 1 versus 8 is just a complete waste of time. I remember the LeBron Heat years where they would play Milwaukee and they would be like minus $1 billion in the first round. Like, I mean, somebody might draw the Warriors or the Lakers in the 1-8. Like, it's a balanced playoffs. It's a fun playoff, so it should be fun when we get there in a month or so.
Oh, I mean, look, I mean, the West 7 through 10 right now is sick. I mean, it's sick. I mean, Sacramento and Dallas. I mean, you really want to see Luka for 7 games if you're the 2 seed? I mean,
right.
I would imagine whoever the 2 seed is would find a way in that series, but that doesn't sound like a lot of fun. And you mentioned it. I mean, it could be the Lakers in a 1-8. I mean, if you're Minnesota and you've been this franchise where, other than the Garnett year where they got that 1 seed, you've been this miserable franchise all your existence. And all right, we got the 1 seed. What's your reward? 7 games against Anthony Davis and LeBron James. Oh, great. That's a lot of fun.
No doubt about it. Jeff, you're the best man. Let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, on the tweets at Jeff Parles. South Point Studio on YouTube is where you can find my show, Sports by the Book. We are this week going to have a Selection Sunday special that goes right after the bracket's fully revealed. So around 7 o'clock Eastern time, we'll be doing that. And then our normal shows, weekdays, 6 p.m. Eastern time. And then normally on Saturdays and Sundays, 11:30 a.m. Eastern. But that will not be the case a week from today on Selection Sunday. Gotta love Selection Sunday being St. Patrick's Day, Will.
Yeah, much later than usual. Took a while to get here. Everything pushed back a good week or so. Where usually St. Patrick's Day, you're like a round or 2 into the tournament. Sometimes that's the round of 32. Sometimes you get a tournament game on there where it's the first round, but definitely a little later.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. It's gonna be a heck of a tournament this year, man.
Jeff, appreciate it, man. We'll catch up soon down the road.
Always a pleasure, Will.
All right, that will do it. Thank you to Jeff Parles. Appreciate him stopping by. Always fun talking with Jeff. We should be back end of the week with another pod. Maybe I'll do a little midweek college basketball if I want to sprinkle in another guest. But other than that, usual schedule back to Monday. Friday, I had the little bonus pod with Adnan for the Oscars on Wednesday. I'll start to do those maybe here and there, add a little extra content. But other than that, see you at the end of the week. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe. See you Friday.